Welcome to Medieval History Channel 97, where the past is not forgotten, but reborn. Greetings, time travelers. At Medieval History Channel 97, we take you deep into the world of the Middle Ages, not through fairy tales, but through the raw and majestic reality, from plague-ridden cities to towering cathedrals, from blood-soaked battlefields to silent monasteries, from kings and peasants to knights and priests. Every voice, every shadow, every echo of history lives here. Tonight, we drift into shadow, into a time veiled not in romance, but in rot. A time where plagues moved silently through cobbled streets, where punishment was a public ritual and dinner was a thin gray broth that barely warmed your bones. Forget what the movies told you. The glowing castles, the gallant knights, the noble quests. That was a dream. The real Middle Ages, it was a struggle to survive. And you, modern, tender, comfortable you, likely wouldn't make it past sunrise. But if you're still curious, still drawn to the forgotten corners of history, then settle in. If this awakens something in you, a strange curiosity or a quiet chill, feel free to like and subscribe. And while you're here, share in the comments. Where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? I love seeing all the scattered lanterns across the globe flicker to life. Now, dim the lights. Let the noise of the day fall away. Maybe turn on a fan to mimic the soft rustle of wind slipping through crumbling thatch. Because this isn't just a story, this is a time machine. And tonight, it drops you into the year 1325. You open your eyes. The first sensation? Cold. The second? Itching. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. You lie on what someone centuries ago decided to call a bed, a half-decayed sack of straw crawling with bugs, drenched in the scent of old hay and something sour. It once belonged to a barn. You try not to think too hard about what else might still live in it. There are no pillows, no soft sheets, no downy duvets, just a coarse wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter and now hangs heavy with dirt and damp, like draping yourself in misery. A bell tolls in the distance, sharp, metallic, and unrelenting. Your alarm clock. But instead of hitting snooze, you hit reality. Your home is a single wooden room where daylight struggles to sneak in on everyone. Your parents, siblings, livestock, and lice breathe the same sour air. There's no privacy, no warmth, just the ever-present perfume of sweat, soil, and despair. And you? You're 22 years old, already halfway to the grave. Your bones ache from a life spent bent under weight, your knees pop like overworked hinges, and every stretch reminds you that time isn't kind. It's cruel, and in this era, fast. So welcome. You're not just imagining the Middle Ages anymore, you're surviving them. Waking up in medieval Europe isn't just an inconvenience. It's a test of spirit. You open your eyes and immediately regret it. The straw mattress beneath you is damp, either from last night's rain dripping through the tired thatched roof, or from something far less poetic left behind by the neighbor's wandering chicken. Either way, your bare feet find their place in the cold, sticky unknown that has become your floor. There's no sanctuary to retreat to, no bedroom door to close, no moment of quiet to gather yourself. You're not alone. Not even close. You share this space with your parents, siblings, a cousin who overstayed his welcome 5 winters ago, and an assortment of fleas that seem to thrive no matter what the season. Privacy? That's a luxury of the future. Here, your every breath is communal, your every move observed, your you time reduced to a fantasy whispered about like magic. And this is just morning. Dragging yourself out of your itchy, musty haystack of a bed is an accomplishment in itself. But as you rise, nature screams, not whispers, its call. You need to relieve yourself, and suddenly, every invention of modern plumbing becomes a cherished dream you never knew you had. No porcelain, no seat, no paper, no dignity. If you're lucky, and by lucky we mean not yet sick, there's a wooden bucket behind the house. Of course, it's already full. Uncle Wolf Stan had a rough night after a questionable turnip stew, and the scent is biblical. You hold your breath. Do what needs to be done, and then the ritual begins. Open the window, and with all the grace you can muster, you hurl it out into the street. No sewage system, no sanitation workers, just a quick yell, "Gardaloo," and hope that the neighbors have fast reflexes. The streets, they're not streets. They're open-air sewers, meandering with a foul blend of waste, rot, tat, and fluids you'd rather not identify. Walking through them is like dancing between puddles of plague. And should you find yourself in a town with public latrines, you might think you've struck gold. But these aren't havens. They're cramped wooden boxes of despair, where strangers sit shoulder to shoulder, pretending not to notice the smells or the sounds, or the absence of any concept of personal space. Toilet paper? Never heard of her. Instead, you reach for what's available. Straw, moss, old rags, maybe even a rough scrap of wool if you're feeling indulgent. Many go without. Out. And suddenly it makes sense why people back then didn't shake hands, because hygiene wasn't just a challenge. It was a losing battle. Living in a castle, it must be better, right? Not quite. You might be granted the luxury of a garderobe, a humble hole carved into stone, dropping your waist straight into the moat below. Practical, perhaps, until you realize your enemies know about it too. And yes, they have climbed in through that very chute. There is no deeper humiliation than being ambushed through your own waste. Whether you were born a peasant or a lord, toileting in the Middle Ages was less a necessity and more a daily ritual of shame. It was cold, exposed, hazardous, and always, always foul. One misstep on a slick stone path and you might find your face inches from the remnants of last week's humanity. And no, you haven't brushed your teeth. But that horror can wait. For now, you've survived the lavatory. Perhaps you think you've earned a reward, a warm breakfast, something comforting, nourishing. Unfortunately, this is medieval Europe. Comfort does not exist here. Breakfast is not a pleasure. It is a sentence. No poached eggs, no scent of coffee brewing, no toasted bread singing golden in the fire. You huddle near the hearth, shivering, and cradle a wooden bowl filled with something thick, gray, and vaguely offensive, as though scraped from the sole of a muddy boot. Welcome to your morning portion of pottage, a lumpy, flavorless stew of grains, roots, and, if fortune smiles, a lonely bean or two. It has been simmering for days, sometimes weeks, in the same pot, with new scraps simply dumped atop the old. It is not a meal. It is a living, breathing experiment in sustenance. Beside it sits a piece of bread, or rather a weapon disguised as food. Hard as stone, dense with coarse rye or barley flour, sometimes padded with sawdust or ground acorns, because wheat, in this world, is fantasy reserved for the rich. This loaf is not to be sliced. It is to be endured, negotiated with, chewed like bark, and drink. Forget citrus or oat milk or anything resembling purity. You drink beer. Yes, beer at dawn, not for pleasure, but because the water is alive, with filth, rot, and creatures too small to see, yet all too capable of killing you. Your morning begins not with warmth, nor with comfort, but with necessity. You lift a wooden cup to your lips, filled with weak ale. It's flat, bitter, and barely enough to wash down the coarse bread, but it won't kill you. That's the best you can ask for. Even the children drink it, not because they should, but because water is more dangerous. Hunger isn't an event here, it's a constant hum beneath your ribs. Meat, a luxury whispered about, reserved for saints. Days or your lord's rare generosity. Cheese? Maybe. If you're lucky, and if the rats haven't gotten to it first. You dream of fruit the way someone might dream of warmth in winter, with a kind of hollow longing. When it comes, it's a brief, bruised sweetness. Then it's gone, fermented, pressed into wine you'll likely never taste. And spices? A single pinch of pepper costs more than you'll earn in a month. Salt is locked away like treasure. So you chew on yesterday's bread, hard, gritty, and flecked with ash from the hearth, and pray that no rodent nibbled your porridge in the night. This isn't a meal, it's survival. And just like that, the day begins not with energy, but with endurance. Then comes dressing. As if dressing were something you had a choice in. You own one outfit. One. It's a tunic, rough as bark and stiff from wear, stained with seasons of sweat and soil. There's no changing for weather, no rotation, no such thing as clean. You wear it until it falls apart, or until your skin does. Underwear? If fortune favors you, maybe a linen underlayer. If not, you endure the scratch of unwashed wool directly on your body, every seam a slow scrape. There is no soap, no washing machine, no relief. Cleaning your clothes means dragging water from the river, boiling it over fire, and scouring fabric with lye until your hands are raw. You do this not weekly, but when absolutely necessary, when the smell becomes stronger than your willpower. Shoes, you likely don't have any. If you do, they're little more than patched leather and wishful thinking. Most days, your bare feet brave mud, dung, and stones sharp enough to draw blood. Every step is a risk. A cut could fester, an infection could mean death. Your skin burns in the summer, cracks in the winter, and suffers always. And yet, this is not misfortune. This is life, this is normal, and no one pities you. You itch constantly, relentlessly. It's not just an annoyance, it's a way of life. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs have claimed your body like squatters in a ruined castle, and they aren't going anywhere. Nobles, monks, children, they're all walking ecosystems of pests. Misery has no social class here. You could be discussing in salvation with the local priest while furiously scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon, and not a single eyebrow would lift. Because this is normal. This is daily life. Your skin is raw, flayed by your own nails. Your scalp burns. Less a crown of hair, more a battlefield of teeth and welts. And if a rash breaks out, that's just fate dealing you another hand. There's no diagnosis, no ointment, no comforting voice telling you it's treatable. No. You just carry it, like a secret companion, like shame stitched into your skin. If it doesn't get infected, congratulations. Your torment will simply linger for half a year like a curse you can't scrub off. But there's no time to wallow. The day has begun, and misery doesn't excuse you from labor. You wrap yourself in damp, itchy wool, your second skin of suffering, and drag your bones outside. Smile? Why bother? Not out of despair, but practicality. In the Middle Ages, smiling is dangerous, not for your soul, but for your teeth, because your teeth are dying. Slowly, painfully, publicly. Toothbrushes don't exist. Toothpaste is a fantasy. Mouthwash? A myth. The best you might manage is gnawing on a stick or swirling vinegar like it's salvation. But your teeth are rotting all the same, blackened ruins in a jaw of decay. By your mid-20s, your mouth resembles a crumbling tomb. Cavities, abscesses, bleeding gums, all a given. Each bite of gritty bread scrapes what little enamel remains. Every sip of sour wine reminds you you're falling apart from the inside out. And the pain? It's not just physical, it's existential. It's the kind of dull, throbbing agony that makes you contemplate theology, alcohol, or self-surgery, whichever comes first. Because that's your option. Pull it yourself, or pay the local barber surgeon, the same man who trims your hair, to rip it out with an iron hook by candlelight. No anesthetic, just you, your screams, and maybe a prayer. And if the tooth is infected, it might not stop with your mouth. No antibiotics, no mercy. The poison spreads, a fever takes hold, and before long, you're gone, another soul swallowed by the silent cruelty of a world that does not care. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where even a smile can kill you. That's right. What sends us to the pharmacy today with a prescription, a promise, and maybe a few side effects could have signed your death sentence in the 1300s. And if you think social life offered any comfort, think again. Romance, affection, even a simple kiss? Forget it. Halitosis hangs heavy in the air. Everyone has it. No one escapes it. Breath smells like rot, teeth ache like open wounds, and mouths become battlegrounds of infection and decay. But if you're single, your worth isn't measured by your charm or your grin. It's measured in acres and animals, your land, your livestock, your utility. Your teeth throb, but there's no time to rest. Outside, the real war is waiting. Not the kind fought with swords, but with backs, bones, and blood. Time to work. Except there's no job as we know it. No office, no desk, no pay raise, no recognition. Just one unspoken directive: survive, while breaking your body for someone else's comfort. You're a peasant. Welcome to your legacy. That means the land you sweat on isn't even yours. It belongs to a lord who likely wouldn't know your name if he tripped over your dying body. You rise with the sun and collapse only when darkness returns. Your tools? Splintered wood, dull blades, and the bones you haven't yet broken. There's no weekend, no clocking out, only day after day after day. Sunday might be a day of rest if the harvest doesn't call, or raiders don't arrive, or your gangrenous toe doesn't scream louder than the church bells. This is labor that contorts the spine and cracks the spirit. Fields are tilled by hand unless you're lucky enough to own an ox. You dig, sow, weed, carry, until your back curves like a question mark, begging for mercy. No one asks if you're okay. No one wonders if your soul feels heavy. And if you're a woman, double the weight. You don't just labor in the fields. You raise the children, clean the home, cook over open flames, spin wool with aching wrists, feed the livestock, and share your bed with a husband whose lice are slowly crawling toward your skin. Children begin their lives not in play, but in toil. By 5, they're already holding tools, not toys. No school, no books, No fairy tales, just a small wooden rake and a fragile hope to grow up before the flu takes them. And if you're not farming, you're a blacksmith inhaling soot, a tanner soaking in chemicals, a co-opper breathing in dust and rot. Your workshop is a furnace, your air, a poison. The pay? Survival. The perks? Occasional blood loss, break a bone, keep going. Catch a fever? Drink stale beer and pray. This is not a story of glory, it's a story of grit, of living on the edge of exhaustion, quietly, invisibly, and without choice. You don't get to pause, not even for a breath, because rest is a luxury you can't afford. If you stop, you starve, and in medieval Europe, starvation isn't a tragedy, it's a vacancy. So you clench the handle of your shovel like it's the last thing tethering you to this world. The skin on your hand splits, but you keep digging, not out of ambition, but out of survival. This isn't a job. It's a slow death that comes with a daily deadline. And just when your back is screaming and your breath comes in ragged gasps, the sky adds its cruelty. Winter doesn't arrive here, it invades. There's no warmth, no insulation, just planks of wood with gaps wide enough for the wind to whisper through, or howl. Glass windows? A fantasy. You press cloth against the frames, pray for still air, and wrap yourself in a damp wool tunic that's as much comfort as it is curse. The hearth flickers weakly, a reminder that firewood is scarce, and taking a branch from the wrong forest could end your life as swiftly as any blade. So you shiver beside the embers, drift into uneasy sleep, and wake up with your nose numb, your breath visible, your hope a little dimmer. Fingers become icicles, toes stay damp for days. There's no diagnosis for frostbite, only the phrase, bad luck. And when the earth finally thaws, you'd think it gets easier. It doesn't. Summer brings a different kind of suffering, one that bakes from the outside in. Your home becomes an oven. Your clothes cling to you like wet rags, but modesty demands you keep them on. Because to reveal skin is to risk shame, judgment, and the burning kiss of the sun. No fan, no breeze, just still air thick with heat and the stench of last week's stew rotting in the corner. Flies feast on sweat, mosquitoes whisper curses by your ear, and sleep only if you can drown out the cries of infants and the shouts of neighbors through the paper-thin walls. Still, the fields await you. The sun glares down. There is no mercy, no hat, just a makeshift crown of straw that wilts with you. But you keep going, because in this world there's no such thing as sick leave, only a body that one day doesn't rise, and a job that waits patiently for the next desperate soul to take your place. You're either shivering in your rickety little hovel, wondering if your toes will survive until spring, or you're sweating through your only pair of socks while your thighs chafe into a burning misery. And one thing never changes, no matter the season. Your clothes still itch, your food is still awful, and your next job is already waiting, even if you haven't recovered from the last one. Welcome to climate control, medieval style. It doesn't exist. Thirsty? Want to splash some water on your face, snap out of this damp, feverish dream of a life? Forget it. In medieval times, water isn't your friend. It's quietly trying to kill you, sip by sip. Let's start with drinking. That nearby stream looks clear, bubbling like something out of a fantasy film. But the truth, it's brutal. Upstream, someone just dumped a chamber pot into it, and if not that, there's likely a dead pig decomposing in the current. Bacteria, parasites, and the entire microbial army of medieval Europe are lurking in every drop. That's why people drank beer. Yes, even children. But don't picture medieval kids doing keg stands. This was small beer, low in alcohol, high in survival. The brewing process boiled the water, making it far safer than whatever flowed through the town ditch. Wine was another option, for those rich enough to afford it and reckless enough not to care about functioning before noon. Bathing? In theory, yes. In reality, not really. People believed washing opened the pores and let disease seep in. So ironically, staying dirty was considered safer. The crusted layer of filth on your skin, that was your body's sacred armor against illness. Sure, public bathhouses existed, but they quickly turned into hubs for gossip, scandal, and, well, extracurricular activities. Naturally, the church stepped in, and many of them were shut down. Even if you did want to bathe, it was a full-scale production, hauling water from the well, boiling it over fire, filling a leaky wooden tub, and praying no one else used it before you. Or worse, after you. Rainwater? Collected in open barrels where birds poop, insects breed, and moss grows thick and green. Bathing back then? Truly, an unforgettable experience if you lived through it. Whether it was meant for your lips, your skin, or your crops, water in the Middle Ages wasn't so much a source of life as it was a loaded dice roll. One wrong sip and you might find yourself spending your final days on a bed of straw, drenched in fever sweat, clinging to your gut and your regrets, wondering how it all came to this. So next time you drink from the tap, raise a quiet toast to those who came before us. Those who had to choose between thirst and a death sentence delivered by a single gulp. Maybe you drank the water. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you just stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like existential despair. Either way, you're sick, and you need help. You need a doctor. Too bad you're living in the Middle Ages, where medicine is less of a cure and more of a polite, God-fearing form of torture. Let's begin with the diagnosis. No matter what's wrong, a cough, a rash, a broken limb, or the creeping shadow of the plague, it all boils down to one thing. Your humors are out of balance. According to medieval science, your health depended on 4 mystical substances swirling inside you: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Keeping them balanced was the key, as if your body was some kind of divine soup in need of seasoning. Got a fever? Clearly, you have too much blood. The solution? Bloodletting. Yes, they drain your literal life force into a bowl using a dull knife or a ravenous leech and call it healing. And who performed this noble act? Your barber. Imagine going in for a trim and coming out several ounces lighter in spirit and plasma. 2 for 1 special. Feeling anxious? Melancholic? That's obviously excess black bile. The cure? Laxatives. Herbal purges if you're lucky. Otherwise, just cold compresses, mumbled prayers, and people quietly carving your name into wood. And if you've broken a bone or been wounded, you're in real trouble now. There's no anesthesia, unless you count passing out from the pain. Surgery is performed with iron tools that haven't been cleaned since the Crusades, heated not to sterilize, but to intimidate. Antibiotics? Still centuries away. Germ theory? Not even a whisper. Most people believed illness came from foul air or from sin. Got a stomach ache? Must have had unholy thoughts. So now you vomit and confess, hoping salvation comes before your soul checks out. If your condition worsens, the treatment is simple: more leeches, maybe some crushed beetles for good measure, and a priest at your bedside whispering the last rites, just in case the cure doesn't work in time. By now, they're no longer trying to heal you. They're preparing you for the only remedy left: death. And if, by some divine miracle, you survive, people say God took pity on you. The doctor takes the credit, the leech gets promoted. Because in the Middle Ages, medicine wasn't about healing, it was about surviving the cure. After a long day of hard labor, lice, and bleeding, you shuffle back to your hut, stomach growling, longing for the one comfort left in your life: a warm meal. Bad news, that meal might just kill you. Let's begin with the basics. Food preservation doesn't really exist. No refrigerator, no freezer. Just salt, smoke, or prayers that the winter air is cold enough to keep things from rotting. If you're lucky enough to have meat, it's been hanging for days, swarmed by flies, soaked in questionable brine, and probably shared with a rat or two. Bread is the foundation of your diet, but even that is risky. In bad harvest years, desperate peasants bulk it out with bark, sawdust, or clay. And if it's rye season, ergot fungus might be growing on it, a toxic mold that causes seizures, hallucinations, and sometimes death. Eating bread in this world is like biting into a nightmare laced with LSD and tetanus. Vegetables? Only if they're in season. And you know what's always in season? Turnips. Boiled turnips. Mashed turnips. Turnips floating in pottage, that sad ancient stew that's been simmering since your great-grandfather's funeral. Fruit might appear in the fall, but it spoils quickly. Sugar is rare, hoarded by the wealthy who show off their status with blackened, rotting teeth. Milk spoils within hours. Butter and cheese last longer, but they're swimming with bacteria. People eat them anyway, because the only other option is boiling your boot. As for seasoning, forget it. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, and nutmeg are worth more than gold. For peasants, flavor means onions, a dash of salt, if you're lucky, and regret. Most meals taste like wet burlap dusted with sorrow. But food isn't just a health hazard, it's a political one. Wild game belongs to the Lord, not you. Caught poaching a rabbit, you could be fined, imprisoned, or hanged. That's right, dinner could be a death sentence. So when you finally sit down by flickering firelight, spoon hovering over a bowl of gray, nameless stew, remember, every bite is a gamble. And still, you eat. Because in the Middle Ages, food doesn't nourish you, it tests you, and now the sun has set. You've made it through another punishing day, worked your hands raw, choked down a bowl of mystery stew, and lived to tell the tale. But don't even think about relaxing. The sun might be setting, but judgment never sleeps. God is watching. The priest is watching. And so is your neighbor Agnes, who treats gossip like divine duty and won't hesitate to report your absence from Mass. In medieval Europe, religion isn't part of life. It is life. The church owns your time, your thoughts, your body. It governs your calendar, your laws, your education, assuming you can read, your birth, your marriage, your death, and every breath in between. Think of it as your spiritual landlord, and spoiler alert, you're always behind on rent. Your day is divided by bells, not for beauty, but obedience. Morning, noon, night. Each clang is a summons to prayer. Miss one? That's a sin. Forget to kneel? Sin. Eat meat on a Friday? Sin. Have a saucy dream about your neighbor's wife? Double sin. And hell? Hell is not a metaphor. The priests paint it in vivid cinematic horror. Rivers of fire, boiling lakes of blood, demons jabbing pitchforks with gleeful precision, and screams, endless, eternal screams. If the plague hasn't broken you yet, the threat of damnation surely will. You can't read the Bible. It's in Latin, a language reserved for monks, scholars, and the one noble kid who bathes. So you depend on the priest to translate, interpret, and deliver God's messages, which, oddly, always seem to require you to try harder, pray longer, and give more. Tithing isn't optional. You owe the church 1/10 of everything. Wheat? Fork it over. Eggs? Hand them in. Have nothing left? That's fine. Misery, it turns out, is a spiritual offering too. And holidays? Don't let the word fool you. These holy days may give your body rest, but not your soul. You're expected in church, fasting, confessing, repenting, reminding yourself that too much joy is dangerous, that pleasure is a gateway to sin. This isn't just faith, it's surveillance with ints. To question the church in the Middle Ages isn't bold, it's a death wish. Heretics are burned alive, witches drowned without trial, blasphemers flogged until their backs are raw, and those who simply wonder too loudly are quietly reformed, through fear, through pain, through silence. So, you don't question, you comply, you bow, you chant, you mouth the prayers, not always because you believe, but because you fear what happens if you don't. Maybe, if you keep your head down and your voice low, your soul will make it to paradise. If the priest decides you're worthy, because God might be merciful, but the church, rarely. And if life as a medieval peasant is brutal, try living it as a woman. Filth, famine, fear, plus childbirth, submission, and erasure. Being a woman in the Middle Ages isn't just hard, it's like playing life on the hardest difficulty. No health bar, no magic, and no second chances. Your fate is carved early. Born a girl, that means marry young, bear children, obey, die exhausted. Education, only if you're noble. And even then, it's Latin hymns in a convent, not philosophy or politics. For most, learning ends after butter churning and basic stitching. Marriage doesn't wait. You could be promised at 12, pregnant by 14. This isn't romance, it's negotiation. Land for loyalty, goats for daughters. Your opinion? Unnecessary. Once married, you're not a partner. Your property. Your role, birth heirs, cook meals, keep the house standing, and never raise your voice. Speak too much and you're labeled a nag, or worse, a witch. And that word, witch, isn't metaphorical. It's a sentence. It means suspicion, accusation, and death by drowning or fire, whichever is fashionable in your village. You don't even need to curse someone. Sometimes it's enough to know too much about herbs, or simply not smile at the right person. Childbirth is a gamble, not a miracle. There's no doctor, no medicine, no clean instruments. If the baby comes breech or the bleeding won't stop, prayers are all you have. Some survive 10 births, many don't survive one. And if you do survive, there's no rest. You nurse the infant, clean the hut, cook for 10, tend the garden, and help in the fields, all while swatting fleas and pretending not to feel broken. You are the support beam of a crumbling world, and no one sees it. Unmarried? Suspicious, widowed, defenseless, opinionated, dangerous. A woman who stands out, who knows too much, speaks too plainly, or simply exists too loudly, becomes a threat. Because in this world, survival isn't about strength, it's about silence. Even within the sacred walls of the church, your worth is diminished. As a nun, your life is one of silence and submission. No speaking without permission, no freedom to come and go, and your soul, no matter how devout, is always deemed lesser than a man's. In the grand design of medieval society, a woman's role is simple: endure, obey, reproduce, and suffer, preferably with a quiet, patient smile. Because even in an age where everyone is suffering, women are expected to suffer beautifully. Up to this point, you've faced filth, hunger, and injustice, perhaps even been headbutted by a goat. But just as you think you've reached the limit of hardship, violence arrives, abrupt, bloody, and completely normal by the standards of the time. Let there be no illusion, the Middle Ages were not peaceful. Law and order was little more than hoping the local lord had gotten enough sleep. Violence wove itself into every corner of daily life, in the home, in the streets, on battlefields, in churches, even in arguments over whose turn it was at the communal bread oven. Crime was rampant, punishment was grotesque, and justice was not a shield, it was a performance. Steal a loaf of bread, lose a hand. Accused of lying, a metal spike through your tongue. Talk too much, enter the scold's bridle, a metal cage for your head, complete with an iron bar shoved into your mouth. A lesson in silence, they called it. Now suppose you're accused of something more serious: heresy, theft, witchcraft. How do you prove your innocence? Through pain. Welcome to the theater of trials by ordeal. One version: plunge your hand into boiling water to retrieve a stone. If your flesh heals clean in 3 days, you're innocent, you're guilty, and infected, and possibly dying. Another test: you're thrown into a river. If you sink, you're innocent and dead. If you float, you're guilty and still doomed. It's not justice. It's a cruel game show where survival is the prize and the host wants you to lose. And if you're sentenced to death, know that you won't die alone. Executions are public. Spectacle, entertainment, hangings, beheadings, burnings, all staged before roaring crowds. Vendors walk through the audience. Children watch from their father's shoulders. It's the medieval version of primetime television. At home, violence isn't hidden, it's expected. A husband beating his wife is not only legal, it's often encouraged. Children, too, are disciplined with fists and rods. Out on the street, a sideways glance at a noble's horse could get you pummeled. This world doesn't whisper threats, it shouts them with iron and fire and bone. And then there was war. Never far, never still. Local feuds flared like brush fires, borders were drawn and redrawn in blood, and crusades marched in God's name but left only ash in their wake. Sometimes they fought for land, sometimes for faith, sometimes simply because they didn't know what else to do. Violence wasn't a breakdown of order, it was the order, a way of life, a fact as constant as hunger or rain. Everyone lived with the awareness that safety was an illusion, that justice was a dice roll, and that your neighbor might kill you over a pig, a fence, or a glance held too long. So you walked carefully, kept your eyes low, trusted no one holding a club, because a friendly face today might swing it tomorrow. And if you've survived this long, through the lice, the leeches, the filth, the fear, you're not rewarded with peace. You're simply invited into the final act, an early, unremarkable death. To breathe past 40, that makes you something of a legend. The old one. Not out of affection, but because everyone else is gone. The numbers don't lie. Average life expectancy hovers between 30 and 40, but that's skewed by the brutal truth that nearly half of all children die before they've even reached their 5th birthday. A cough, a fever, a winter too long. That's all it takes. There are no vaccines, no penicillin, no cures, just prayer and a handful of herbs, and sometimes not even that. Make it through childhood and you'll enter adulthood already tired. You start working before your spine fully forms, and by 25, your body creaks like a broken gate. Your teeth, scattered memories. Your fingers, maybe you're missing one. Optimism, that left with your second winter. And for women, death waits in the quiet cradle of life. Childbirth is a battlefield, no anesthesia, no trained hands, just a fire, some boiled water, whispered prayers, and hope you don't bleed out before the baby breathes. Men face different demons: a slip in the field, a knife in a brawl, a crusade that goes nowhere but deeper into suffering. Even errands could turn fatal if you crossed paths with the wrong man in the wrong mood. Sometimes death was loud, a sword, a scream, a raid, but often it came quietly. The plague, sweeping through streets like wind through dry leaves. Famine, gnawing away not just food, but hope. or a poisoned grain where your last hours are spent in agony, screaming at phantoms only you can see. There is no glory in dying here, no noble ending. Just silence, just soil, just a name if you're lucky, remembered by someone who lives just long enough to forget it. Here is your rewritten version with deeper emotional resonance and vivid atmosphere, staying true to the dark reflective tone. And funerals? If you were lucky, you got one, but most weren't. Bodies were buried quickly, more out of fear than reverence, fear of rot, of disease, of the creeping death that always felt one breath away. No embalming, no ceremony, no carved tombstone or quiet eulogy, just a hole in the dirt, a few murmured prayers, and a thin layer of soil if there was even space left in the overcrowded churchyard. It wasn't rest, it was removal. Because in the Middle Ages, death was everywhere. And life was something you clung to, fiercely, desperately, while knowing it could vanish with a cough, a wound, or a priest's accusation. You didn't retire, you simply stopped showing up. And now that we're here, standing on the edge of your final breath, let's reflect on the day you've just survived. You woke in filth, scratched your way out of a straw bed teeming with life that wasn't yours, relieved yourself into a bucket that's been emptied too few times, brushed your teeth with a prayer and a finger. You nearly fainted from hunger, worked until your bones felt like crumbling chalk, wore damp wool like a second skin of suffering, prayed, genuinely, that the plague would pass you by, and dodged a public hanging for something as absurd as owning a squirrel. That's one day. Just one. Still dreaming of becoming a knight? Still picturing banners in the wind and love songs from balconies? Think again. That version of the Middle Ages, the golden myths of honor and chivalry, of shining armor and candlelit feasts, is a fairy tale. A comforting lie whispered by those who never had to live it. The truth was uglier. Hierarchy wasn't just a social order. It was destiny carved in stone. If you were born poor, you lived poor. You died poor. And if you were born into wealth, lucky you. You might die slightly slower, but you'd still die. From spoiled food, from a wrong word, from a festering wound no one knew how to treat. Even the lords weren't spared. Their castles were cold, damp prisons wrapped in fur and expectation, filled with smoke, insects, and loveless alliances sealed with wine and war. And the odds? You had just as much chance of dying from a splinter as from a sword. So no, these weren't simpler times. They were harsher, heavier, relentless. Every moment required effort. Every breath could betray you. From childbirth to chewing, nothing came without pain. This wasn't a life of leisure, it was a life of endurance. A world where survival wasn't the beginning of your story, it was the whole of it. Here's the rewritten version with deeper emotional resonance and a more vivid sense of humanity, struggle, and inner strength, without adding any extra phrases or framing statements. And if you did find a quiet moment, a breath between the labor, the hunger, and the ache, to wonder if life could be different, if something better was possible, there wasn't much you could do with that thought. No ladder to climb, no medicine to mend you. No screen to search for answers when your skin blistered or your body failed. You lived, you suffered, you worked, and you died, often without ever setting foot beyond the 10-mile stretch that birthed you. And yet, somehow, that wasn't the whole story. Because even in the dirt, people laughed, they sang, they whispered stories by firelight, they fell in love even when love had no room. They made meaning, not because life gave it freely, but because the human heart refuses to stay silent in the dark. Even in the shadow of plague, hunger, and war, they carved out space for joy. So tonight, as you lie in a warm bed with clean sheets, hot water, and medicine within reach, maybe take a moment, not just to marvel at what you have, but to honor what it took to get here. The ancestors who braved filth and fear, who buried children and kept going, who endured the weight of a world built against them, so you wouldn't have to. Long before she was Catherine the Great, empress, reformer, force of will, she was simply Sophie. Sophie Friederike Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst, born in 1729 to a family with more name than power. Her duchy in Pomerania barely registered on the map. But Sophie? She carried something that couldn't be charted, a mind like a blade, a charm that disarmed, and deep inside a quiet, burning hunger. Not for comfort, but for greatness. Her childhood was cold. Her mother, Johanna, wasn't tender. She was tactical, obsessed with rank and ambition. Her father, a Prussian officer, kept his distance, more uniform than parent. So Sophie adapted. She studied. She listened before speaking. She mastered languages, books, faces. She learned how to survive in silence, how to blend obedience with calculation. Those weren't hobbies, they were weapons. When Empress Elizabeth of Russia began searching for a bride for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she cast her eyes west, beyond the Russian steppe. Peter, German by blood, needed a bride who was foreign enough to control but noble enough to legitimize. Sophie was perfect. Modest title, clean religion for now, and a reputation for grace without arrogance. At just 14, Sophie left behind her name, her country, her childhood, and stepped into the storm. Not as a queen, not yet, but as a girl who understood that sometimes power begins not with a crown, but with the quiet decision to never be small. She arrived in the bitter cold of St. Petersburg in 1744, a girl wrapped in fabric too thin for the Russian frost, yet wearing the one thing her mother insisted she bring, a diplomatic smile. Sophie wasn't just stepping into a new country. She was being offered, no, positioned, like a pawn on an imperial chessboard. Her mother nudged her forward with ambition disguised as duty. But Sophie had other plans. She wasn't here to play the game. She came to win it. To survive, she gave up everything that tied her to the world she knew. She converted to Orthodoxy, a public and irreversible transformation that erased Sophie and gave birth to Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine. It wasn't just a baptism, it was a burning of bridges. And once the smoke cleared, there was no home to return to. Nobody watching that teenage girl with frost on her lashes and fire in her eyes could have imagined what would unfold. Betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and empire. But Catherine could, because from the moment she stepped into the Russian court, she stopped being a girl sent to marry a prince. She became a woman quietly preparing to rule. The marriage to Grand Duke Peter was supposed to secure her position, but instead of a crown, it gave her chains. Peter was no heroic monarch in waiting. He was a man-child obsessed with toy soldiers and German heroes, more enthralled by Prussian drill manuals than by his own wife. Their union was cold, awkward, and humiliating. Some said it took years before it was even consummated. He didn't want her. He didn't want Russia. But Catherine did. She embraced the empire with a hunger no one expected. She learned the language until it became hers. She studied its history, absorbed its rituals, memorized its customs. She didn't just adapt, she transformed. While Peter withdrew, Catherine embedded herself, and the court watched. Every step she took was shadowed. Her letters read, her alliances doubted, her loyalty questioned. The Empress still held power, but her reign was waning, and everyone in the palace could smell the shift in the wind. Plots brewed behind every closed door, smiles hid daggers. Catherine was alone, surrounded by whispers, even her own mother, still pulling invisible strings on behalf of foreign powers. But Catherine wasn't naive. She listened, she observed, and she began to weave her own web, not loudly, but with patience, with precision. Because in the venomous halls of the Russian court, survival meant playing a role, but victory meant rewriting the script. She captivated military officers, earned the trust of scholars, and cultivated an image of poise and self-discipline, a striking contrast to her husband's petulant outbursts and brazen disdain for Russian customs. While Peter played the fool in public, Catherine, behind closed doors, immersed herself in the writings of Enlightenment thinkers, Voltaire, Montesquieu, and others who planted in her a grander vision. To the world, she was merely a foreign princess, a quiet consort without power. But in her mind, she was already shaping an empire built on reason, education, and strength. There was just one obstacle, Peter. As long as he lived, she was trapped, a brilliant woman bound to an erratic man unfit to lead. So she watched, she listened, and most of all, she waited. Catherine understood something essential. In Russia, thrones weren't inherited, they were taken. In 1762, after nearly 20 years of patience and precision, her moment arrived. With Empress Elizabeth dead, Peter ascended as Tsar Peter III, and almost instantly his rule began to crumble. He alienated the church, enraged the nobility, insulted the military, and sang praises to Prussia, Russia's enemy. He reversed cherished reforms, mocked sacred institutions, and announced plans to cast Catherine aside for his mistress. The court turned colder. The generals, many fiercely loyal to Catherine, whispered in corridors, and the Russian people, deeply devout and fiercely nationalistic, saw their new ruler not as a czar, but as a betrayal. Catherine moved swiftly. In July, while Peter relaxed at his summer palace, she orchestrated a bloodless coup. With the backing of key military officers, among them her lover Grigory Orlov and his powerful brothers, she rode through St. Petersburg in full imperial regalia. The Imperial Guard rallied to her side. She was declared Catherine II, Empress of Russia. Peter, shocked and isolated, surrendered within days. He was arrested, and soon after he was dead. The cause? Officially, a sudden illness. Unofficially, murder. And just like that, Catherine took the throne. Not by birthright, not through marriage, but by sheer force of will. She was a foreign-born woman with no legitimate claim, yet she claimed an empire without shedding a drop of blood on the battlefield. It was a triumph of intellect, patience, and unshakable ambition. History would remember her not as a consort, but as Catherine the Great. But her real challenge had only just begun. Seizing power was one thing. Holding it, shaping it into something that would outlive her, was something else entirely. Could Russia truly embrace her? Would the nobles who once whispered behind closed doors now bow with genuine respect? And perhaps, most haunting of all, could she survive where her husband had not? Catherine understood a truth most rulers learn too late. Power acquired through plots and whispers can vanish just as quickly. If she wanted to endure, she couldn't just rule from the shadows. She would have to become something more than a schemer. She would have to become a visionary. And so began the transformation, from a silent strategist to a sovereign who would rewrite the map of Europe, welcome the Enlightenment, and redefine womanhood on a throne. Catherine could have stopped at the crown. She could have wielded it like a shield, clung to it like a prize. But she wanted more. Not just for herself, but for Russia. Her ambition was not limited to armies or territories. She dreamed of an empire that could think. Where Peter the Great had idolized the might of Prussia and the discipline of soldiers, Catherine fell in love with ideas, with the voices of Voltaire, Diderot, and the thinkers who dared to challenge the darkness with reason. She believed that progress came not only from conquest, but from knowledge. That a monarch's true strength was not domination, but service, even as she ruled with unshakable authority. Catherine didn't just study Enlightenment philosophy. She embodied it. For over 15 years, she exchanged letters with Voltaire, charming him while fiercely defending her right to rule. She invited Diderot into her court, not just to honor him, but to support him, buying his entire library when he needed funds. In the quiet hours behind palace doors, Catherine became a student of the law. She read, debated, questioned. She worked not just as a ruler, but as an architect of a better empire. In 1767, she launched the Legislative Commission, a bold and sweeping attempt to rewrite Russia's legal code from the ground up. And with it, she authored the Nakaz, a manifesto disguised as a legal guide, calling for equality before the law, the abolition of torture, and the idea that rulers exist to serve the people. For a woman on the throne of 18th century Russia, this was nothing short of revolutionary. But ideals do not always survive their environment. Catherine ruled a vast, unwieldy, deeply feudal land where nobles saw peasants not as people but as property. The Enlightenment might have lit her imagination, but Russia was still cold with tradition. She knew this, and so she moved not with fire, but with finesse, a reformer's mind within an autocrat's reality. She outlawed certain forms of torture, opened doors to secular education, built schools and libraries across a sprawling, often fractured land, and yet she tightened the nobility's grip on their serfs, not out of cruelty, but calculation, to keep their loyalty, to keep her throne. This was Catherine's great balancing act. Philosopher queen by daylight, ruthless empress behind closed doors. She walked a tightrope strung between Enlightenment ideals and imperial survival, between the golden salons of Paris and the cold, hard corridors of Moscow. Her vision for Russia wasn't a borrowed dream from Europe. It was something bolder, sharper, entirely her own. She didn't want to make Russia European. She wanted to make it modern, with one hand offering reform, the other always holding steel. But transformation from within was not enough. Catherine wanted Russia to grow, to reach beyond its borders, to become a power not just respected, but feared. Peter the Great had cracked open a window to the west. Catherine came to tear down the walls. Under her reign, Russia expanded farther than ever before. She waged war not merely for defense, but to redraw the map of Europe itself. Her most defining struggle? The wars against the Ottoman Empire. Throughout the 1760s and 1770s, these weren't just campaigns for land, they were missions of ideology. Catherine saw herself as a liberator, a defender of Orthodox Christians under Muslim rule, and a rightful protector of Eastern Europe's future. Under the command of generals like Suvorov and Potemkin, Russia seized Crimea, the northern Black Sea coast, and long-coveted access to warm water ports, a prize Russian czars had dreamed of for centuries. These weren't just military victories. They were symbols, loud, defiant declarations that Russia was no longer a forgotten cousin on the edge of Europe. It was a force to be reckoned with. And she didn't stop there. To the west, Catherine turned to diplomacy laced with ambition. In secret meetings and signed treaties, she joined Austria and Prussia in dismembering Poland, carving it apart piece by piece. By the time the Third Partition fell in 1795, Poland no longer existed on any map. And Russia had gained not just land, but millions of new souls, folded into an empire that now stretched wider, reached farther, and cast a longer shadow than ever before. Catherine the Great didn't just seize power with armies, she reshaped an empire with imagination. Expansion, under her rule, was as much about ideology as it was about territory. New cities rose from forest and field, trade routes stretched farther than ever before. She invited German settlers to till Russian soil, planting roots for a new future. From the frozen edges of the Baltic to the golden light of the Black Sea, her empire unfolded like a vast mosaic, complex, diverse, alive. And at its center stood Catherine, reading dispatches, writing laws, directing maps with a steady hand and sharper mind. Some called her ruthless, imperialist, obsessed with power. But to Catherine, empire building wasn't indulgent, it was duty. A sovereign, she believed, wasn't measured by dreams but by dominion. She didn't just want to rule Russia, she wanted to reforge it into a modern, civilized titan, feared by rivals, respected by allies, loyal to one throne, hers. But power is never only public. Behind the palace gates, Catherine's private life was the subject of endless fascination and scandal. She had lovers, not secret flings, but carefully chosen companions. Young, charismatic, sometimes clever, often rewarded with lands, titles, and pensions if they proved worthy. If not, a graceful exit, perhaps with a parting gift. The most significant of them all was Gregory Potemkin, not just a lover, but an intellectual match and strategic partner. Together, they didn't merely share affection, they shared empire. Military campaigns, colonization initiatives, the development of southern Russia, his fingerprints often lay beside hers. Some whisper they were secretly married. History will never confirm. But what is certain, Catherine trusted him like few others. Still, the world, especially Europe, could never separate the Empress from the woman. Gossip clung to her like perfume, pamphlets mocked her desires. Critics painted her as unhinged, insatiable, unnatural. And after her death, the slander deepened, culminating in one of history's most grotesque lies, a malicious rumor involving a horse, created not out of truth, but pure misogyny. Because in the end, Catherine's greatest crime wasn't conquest, it was being a woman who ruled like a man, unapologetically, and with no intention of asking permission. Why the obsession with Catherine the Great? Simple. She was a woman who refused to shrink. In an age when female rulers were expected to embody virtue or tragedy, a saintly virgin or a sorrowful pawn, Catherine rewrote the script entirely. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't apologize. She lived, loved, and ruled with intention, and that terrified people. Her critics called her immoral. But the truth? Catherine was deeply thoughtful, especially about love, power, and the place where they met. She didn't see pleasure as sin. She saw it as natural. She didn't believe intimacy made a woman weak. She believed a ruler could be both passionate and powerful, and she proved it. Where most men failed to separate ego from governance, Catherine brought clarity. Her lovers were often advisors, men of talent, loyalty, and political utility. And when they'd served their purpose, she let them go with grace and a pension. No drama, just decisiveness. Her personal life wasn't a weakness. It was a strategy, and it worked. But behind the power and poise, danger still loomed. In 1773, That danger came thundering out of the south in the form of Yemelyan Pugashev, a rough-mannered Cossack with a beard and a bold lie. He claimed he was Peter III, Catherine's long-dead husband. Somehow, he said, he had survived her coup and returned to reclaim his crown from the German impostor. It was absurd, but to the desperate and downtrodden, truth didn't matter. Hope did. Pugashev promised salvation, land, freedom, lower taxes, the end of serfdom. To peasants crushed by poverty, to Cossacks, to outcasts, he sounded like a miracle. And suddenly the empire shook. Villages rose, fortresses fell, nobles were murdered in their manors. The Volga burned with rebellion. It became the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Not just a revolt, but a reckoning. For the first time, Catherine felt the empire beneath her feet crack. This wasn't diplomacy, it wasn't war with foreign kings, this was her own people, rising from the soil, furious, fearless, and betrayed. But she didn't waver, she didn't hide. Catherine met the chaos with cold resolve. She unleashed her army, crushed the rebellion, and made sure no one forgot who ruled Russia. Not with sentiment, but with steel. Pugashev's rebellion ended in blood. In 1774, his forces were crushed. He was captured, caged like an animal, paraded through the streets, and beheaded in Moscow. A spectacle meant to silence not only a man, but a movement. And it worked, at least on the surface. In the aftermath, Catherine did not retreat. She tightened her grip. The dream she once entertained of liberating the serfs dissolved quietly into the shadows. The rebellion had exposed a truth too dangerous to ignore. Enlightenment philosophy could not hold up the weight of a feudal empire. So Catherine turned to those who could, the nobility. In exchange for their loyalty, she granted them deeper control over the very people she once imagined freeing. This was no longer the empress who quoted Voltaire with hope. This was a ruler who now saw stability as sacred. Reform became slower, safer. Surveillance grew sharper. Whispers of revolt were to be extinguished before they even found breath. Pugachev lost his head, but left behind a lesson that never left Catherine's mind. Power built on inequality does not last. It smolders until it explodes. By the time Catherine approached the end of her reign, she had ruled Russia for over 30 years, longer than any woman in the country's history. She had seized the throne not by birthright, but by sheer will. And with that will, she reshaped the empire, redefined monarchy, and redrew the image of what a woman could be in power. Under her, Russia expanded by more than 200,000 square miles, swallowing Crimea, parts of Poland, and the Black Sea coast. These weren't mere conquests. They were calculated moves, securing warm water ports, unlocking trade, and asserting Russia's place in Europe's great game. But Catherine's legacy wasn't written only on maps. It lived in marble halls, painted canvases, and bound volumes. She founded the Hermitage Museum, gathered one of the most renowned art collections in Europe, and wrote letters to the brightest minds of the Enlightenment. Her court became a hub of elegance, culture, and conversation. In a land often dismissed by the West as backward, Catherine planted the seeds of a new identity, one of intellect, art, and aspiration. She championed education, opening schools for girls, and encouraging the spread of printed books. She brought the smallpox vaccine to Russia and led by example, rolling up her own sleeve to face the needle first. And yet, her reign was steeped in contradiction. For all her progressive words, the serfs remained in chains. Worse, she extended those chains deeper into new territories. Her reforms often floated at the surface, polishing the crown while leaving the foundation of inequality untouched. Still, what she brought was not nothing. She brought structure, ambition, a kind of order that allowed the empire to breathe, to grow, to imagine itself differently. Catherine understood what few rulers do, that power is not inherited. It is built, decision by decision, compromise by compromise, and must be defended every single day. She didn't inherit power through birthright or divine decree. She seized it through unflinching will, calculated brilliance, and an unwavering grasp of strategy. History called her many names: manipulator, tyrant, reformer, seductress. But beneath every label was one unshakable truth: Catherine got things done. When she died in 1796, Russia stood transformed. It was richer, larger, and more powerful than it had been in centuries. She left behind more than land and law. She left behind a throne no longer fragile, an empire no longer doubted, and a legend that would ripple through history like a banner caught in the wind. Catherine didn't merely occupy the role of empress. She ruled it, shaping her reign not with passivity, but with intellect, grit, and a strategic mind as sharp as any general's blade. In doing so, she became not just a sovereign, but a myth. And yet, beneath the power, the grandeur, and the polished portraits, was a woman who knew just how precarious her place truly was. She wasn't Russian by birth, she wasn't meant to rule. She came to power through a coup that shocked the court and scandalized Europe. She led a nation skeptical of female authority, and still, she endured. More than that, she excelled. She refused to be ornamental. She refused to be erased. Catherine read voraciously, wrote endlessly, governed tirelessly. Her daily life was not one of idle leisure, but of constant motion. Reports to review, policies to craft, letters to diplomats, factions to balance. She wasn't just on the throne, she worked the throne, with precision, with intent. But even a woman of her magnitude bore the weight of solitude. She filled her court with artists, scholars, lovers, and loyalists. Yet in her private writings, she confessed how few people she could truly trust. Her son, Paul, became a source of growing fear, not only because of his temperament, but because he represented everything that might unravel the empire she so carefully built. Her deepest bond with Gregory Potemkin evolved from romance to a rare companionship rooted in mutual power. His death left a quiet ache that never softened. Catherine understood the power of image. She knew how to shape a narrative, how to embody many roles. Mother of the nation, enlightened despot, warrior, patron, lover. She curated her mythos like a master artist. But behind every role was a woman who had been betrayed, dismissed, underestimated, and who rose anyway. When she died, she left behind a different Russia, a greater one. But also questions. Could she have ended serfdom? Had she betrayed Enlightenment ideals to hold the empire together? Was she, in the end, a visionary or merely a survivor? History doesn't call her Catherine the Kind or Catherine the Just. It calls her the Great. Not because she was perfect, but because she dared to wield power in a world that told her she shouldn't have any. And she wielded it as if she were born for it. She didn't just wear the crown, she redefined what it meant to earn one. Deep in the lush, breathless jungle of Chiapas, Mexico, where vines cradle stone and the wind carries voices long faded, the ruins of Palenque still speak, softly, insistently, of a world lost to time. Limestone temples rise like ancient ghosts from the canopy, their faces worn but never forgotten. And in 1994, the jungle gave up one of its most sacred secrets. Archaeologist Fanny Lopez Jimenez and her team were surveying Temple 3, overshadowed both literally and historically by the grand temple of the inscriptions, resting place of King Pakal the Great. Temple 3 wasn't expected to yield anything remarkable. But then, they saw it. A chamber, sealed, hidden, untouched. No looters had dared disturb it. No hands had desecrated the silence. It was perfect. When they finally breached the chamber, the air inside felt ancient, still heavy with the weight of centuries. There, resting undisturbed in the quiet dark, lay a stone sarcophagus. They opened it slowly, and from within a breath of crimson rose into the air, cinnabar dust, vivid and violent, painting everything in shades of blood and reverence. And within that sacred red haze, the remains of a woman. She hadn't been discarded. She had been honored. Her skeleton was fragile, but her presence undeniable. A jade mask still adorned her face. Around her, offerings whispered stories, carved jade, polished shells, ceremonial adornments that spoke in the language of royalty. Everything about the burial was sacred. Everything about it said, this woman mattered. And yet, no name, no glyph, no inscription. The silence wasn't an oversight. It was intention. They called her the Red Queen, not because they knew her, but because they felt her. She had lived in the 7th century, in Palenque's golden age. Possibly a queen. Possibly a priestess, perhaps Pakal's consort, or something even more enigmatic. But her tomb stood apart, hidden, protected, untouched. Her death was not just a farewell. It was a ritual, a passage. Her legacy wasn't built with stone or story. It was built with color, with mystery, with silence. She was not meant to be remembered in words. She was meant to be felt. And in the end, it is not the jade, the jewelry, or even the sarcophagus that haunts us. It is the red dust clinging still to her bones, to the walls, to the air itself, as if her spirit refused to fade quietly, as if she's still there, waiting, unnamed, undiminished, eternal. A thick layer of powdered cinnabar blanketed everything: the sarcophagus, the walls, her bones, even the offerings laid gently around her. It didn't dust the stone, it clung, like blood that had long since dried, refusing to let go. To the Maya, this was never an accident. Cinnabar, born from crushed mercury sulfide, was one of the most sacred and most perilous substances in their world. Its red wasn't just vivid, it was visceral. It symbolized blood, yes, but more than that, rebirth. The pulse between worlds, the thread of life that tethered flesh to spirit, earth to sky. Red was sacred, the hue of the rising sun, the shimmer of sacrifice, the essence of life pushing through death's grip. Not merely a symbol, but a spiritual force, a key to transcendence. To cover a body in cinnabar was to mark it for transformation. This wasn't preservation for eternity, it was preparation for a crossing. Because to the Maya, death wasn't a finish line. It was a threshold into another layer of the cosmos. And so the Red Queen, whoever she had been in life, was now being readied not for burial, but for something far more profound: deification. But beneath this ritual shimmered another truth. Cinnabar is poison. Its dust, when breathed too long, can ravage the body. Tremors, madness, hallucinations, death. The Maya may not have known the chemistry, but they understood the power. It was volatile, lethal, sacred. To bury someone in it was to proclaim this was no ordinary mortal. In Palenque, very few received such an honor. Pakal the Great, the ruler whose temple towers over the city, was one. His bones too were bathed in red, and that alone sparked whispers. Was she his queen, his mother, a ruler in her own right? Her skull rested on a bed of jaguar skin, the emblem of power, of otherworldly sight. Around her, obsidian blades, bone needles, and jade figurines told stories too deep for words. Stories of ritual, of honor, of reverence. Every detail of her burial was a prayer in material form. Not silence, ceremony, not stillness, sacred passage. She was not laid to rest, she was guided. Surrounding her red-drenched form was a hush broken only by glints of jade, shell, and stone. Not decoration, but devotion. Each offering chosen with care, each one a companion for the long journey into Xibalba, the Maya underworld. Heavy jade necklaces curled around her, cold and radiant after more than 1,300 years in the dark. Jade to the Maya was not just precious, it was eternal, a symbol of breath, spirit, and the soul's unending path beyond the veil. It symbolized the lifeblood of the land, the green of maize, the pulse of the jungle, the sacred breath of the gods. Jade wasn't just beautiful, it was alive with meaning, and it was only given to those deemed worthy by both men and the divine. When the Red Queen was laid to rest, jade adorned her like armor, covering her chest, circling her wrists, hanging from her ears. This was no ordinary burial, this was reverence. A clear sign that in life, she held not only influence, but perhaps something even greater: divine favor. But nothing captures her mystery more than the jade mask placed gently over her face. Not bold or boastful like Egypt's golden death masks. This one was quiet. Made of tiny, carefully carved tiles, it followed the curves of her face, an intimate mosaic of identity and immortality. It wasn't made for display, it was made for transcendence. To protect her spirit, to remind the gods who she was, to ensure she would not be forgotten in the journey beyond. Around her were the tools of mystery: obsidian blades, bone needles, shell ornaments, symbols perhaps of healing, of wisdom, of ritual. A single bone pin bore a carved design, subtle, deliberate, a whisper from her hand across centuries. Her voice, though lost, still tries to speak. Sealed ceramic vessels sat by her feet and along the tomb's edge, filled once with food, drink, incense. These were not grave goods, they were provisions. Because to the Maya, death was not a descent. It was a voyage, arduous and sacred. These items were not luxury, they were survival. There is a quiet intention to her resting place. No gold, no towering monuments, just a space filled with meaning. Each item placed like a step on a map for the soul. The Red Queen was not being buried, she was being prepared. But amid all the sacredness, one thing remains achingly absent: her name. No glyphs on the walls, no inscription on the stone. She was powerful. That much is clear, but history left her silent. And so scholars have searched. They've stitched together threads of lore and lineage. One name rises above the rest: Zakbu Aj, wife to Kinich Janab Pakal, Pakal the Great. But Zakbu Aj was more than consort. She may have been a priestess, a matriarch, a spiritual guide for the kingdom of Palenque. And even now, though her name was buried, her legacy breathes through stone, jade, and silence. She was born into nobility and entered Palenque's royal dynasty through marriage at a young age. She gave birth to at least 3 sons, all of whom rose to prominence, and during her husband's reign she held a vital ceremonial role. Her presence was not ornamental, but foundational. If anyone was worthy of a burial wrapped in sacred ritual and deep reverence, it was her. And there's strong reason to believe this was exactly what happened. Her tomb lies just steps away from the magnificent burial chamber of Pakal the Great, hidden within the Temple of the Inscriptions. Such proximity wasn't likely a matter of chance. It spoke of intention, of partnership. In life, they ruled side by side. In death, they were to remain united. Then there's the cinnabar. Thick, brilliant red, and deadly in its beauty, it coated her tomb in the same way it did Pakal's. In all of Palenque, only 2 burials bore that much cinnabar, Pakal's and hers. This wasn't coincidence, it was symbolism, it was sacred. But then the mystery begins to unravel. DNA tests were conducted, seeking to confirm the relationship. And yet, the results offered no clear answers. There was no evidence of a maternal link between her and Pakal. But that alone proved little. A wife need not share blood with her husband, only a bond, a legacy, a throne. Speculation flooded in. Some proposed she was Sakuk, Pakal's mother, a formidable queen who had ruled Palenque until he came of age. Others suggested a priestess, a sister, or an ancient queen whose name had been buried by time's forgetting. But the strongest evidence points to Zakbuaj, a royal queen, a mother of kings, and the woman who likely stood beside Pakal in life's rituals and in statecraft. The absence of a name on her tomb may not be a historical gap, it may be intentional. For in Maya cosmology, identity wasn't preserved in stone. It was kept alive through blood rites, symbols, and the breath of ritual. The sacred red of cinnabar, the silence of a sealed chamber, the alignment of tombs that whisper eternity. And so the Red Queen remains both real and elusive. Not a name etched in limestone, but a presence, embodied in scarlet dust and the quiet power of Maya queenship. To understand her, we must first understand the world she moved through. A world where royal women were far more than consorts. They were sovereigns in their own right, diplomats, priestesses, kingmakers. Their bloodlines wove the fabric of dynasties. Their rituals anchored the cosmos. Their choices shaped kingdoms. Sakuk is testament to that power. When Palenque's throne stood empty, she didn't wait for a man to fill it. She took it. She ruled decisively and visibly until her son, Pakal the Great, was ready to ascend. These women did not wait for history to remember them. They shaped it. And even when their names are lost, their influence echoes in tombs, in temples, in the red shimmer of cinnabar still clinging to stone. She wasn't a placeholder. She was power embodied, issuing decrees, overseeing construction, and shaping the very world that her son Pakal would one day rule. Without her, his rise might never have happened. And she wasn't alone. Across the Maya world, in cities like Yaxchilan, Naranjo, and Calakmul, inscriptions tell us of women who led ceremonies, forged alliances, and even commanded armies. They weren't hidden in the background. They stood tall in stelae and murals, draped in sacred regalia, crowned with intricate headdresses, not beside kings, but often beside gods, as equals, as rulers, sometimes as the ones above them. Their names were carved in stone, their deeds etched in glyphs, until they weren't. Centuries later, when the Spanish arrived, they saw only what they wanted to see. Silence where there had once been speech, submission where there had been command. They looked through a lens that erased memory. But archaeology remembers what history forgets. The Red Queen stands in that remembered light, not just as a royal consort or mother to a king, but as a foundation. Her role may not have carried the official title of ruler, but everything about her burial tells another story, a story of reverence, of authority, of sacred blood. Her jade mask wasn't merely a work of art, it was identity crystallized, a symbol of power worn in life and guarded fiercely in death. She may have been the very bloodline that held Palenque's fragile dynasty together. In Maya civilization, a queen wasn't simply ornamental, she was sacred lineage made flesh. She was a voice in ritual, a mediator between the divine and the earthly, a living bridge between gods and men. The Red Queen may have no name that we know, but in her time she had presence, she had voice, and her final resting place speaks louder than any forgotten inscription. She was laid to rest not just with treasure, but within architecture steeped in sacred intention. Her tomb is no ordinary grave. It is ritual. It is cosmology. It is design woven with myth. Temple 13, though modest compared to its neighbor, holds something profound. Just steps from the mighty temple of the inscriptions, where Pakal lies, the Red Queen rests. Their proximity is not coincidence. It is sacred geometry, a dynastic alignment. Temple 13 may rise humbly, but at its heart lies a hidden chamber, untouched by time. A crypt buried deep within, reachable only by a narrow, steep staircase, as if meant for pilgrims of memory, not mere visitors. She wasn't buried in shadow. She was entombed in legacy. The descent into her tomb feels less like an act of archaeology and more like a sacred rite, a symbolic journey into the underworld. Step by step, stone by stone, we descend into silence. The chamber we reach is bare, hewn from ancient limestone, sealed tight for over 1,130 years. No glyphs whisper her name, no murals celebrate her story. The walls hold no words, only stillness. But maybe that silence is the story. This is not a place meant for the living to interpret, but for the dead to transform. At the center rests her sarcophagus, solemn, carved from limestone, unmoving yet full of intent. It mirrors the grandeur of Pakal's nearby tomb, but without the cosmic spectacle. Where Pakal's lid bursts with myth and celestial rebirth, hers holds quiet power. Here the focus turns inward, to the body, to the blood-red dust of Cinnabar, to death itself as a sacred ritual. Even the architecture breathes meaning. The tomb aligns east to west, echoing the sun's eternal path, rising in life, setting in death, a cosmic alignment as if even the stone bows to the journey of her spirit. The space is small but charged, intimate, intentional. It doesn't impress, it communes. This was no ordinary burial. This was a shrine, a threshold, a moment frozen in stone. Maya temples were never just monuments. They were bridges between sky and earth, between gods and mortals, between the seen and the unseen. To be buried within one was not to be laid to rest. It was to be elevated beyond the human realm. The Red Queen's tomb is not a place of endings. It is a sanctum of becoming. Her bones lie nestled in stone, her spirit veiled in cinnabar, her presence still pulsing in the architecture around her. A temple that speaks in silence, and still, it says, she mattered. To the Maya, death was never final. It was a portal, the entrance to Xibalba, the underworld. For the Red Queen, this passage was more than personal. It was spiritual, political, cosmological. Every element of her burial was ritualized, deliberate, woven into myth. Xibalba was no peaceful rest. It was a labyrinth of shadows, rivers of blood, gods of decay, trials meant to test the soul. Only those properly buried, ritually prepared, and spiritually armed could pass through it unscathed. She was ready. Her body dusted in sacred cinnabar, her tomb lined with offerings. But perhaps most haunting are the ritual tools: bone needles, obsidian blades, tokens of auto-sacrifice, perhaps symbols of rites she once performed to call upon the gods, or tools used in final offerings at her death to empower her journey. They are not just remnants, they are echoes of power. In this stone sanctuary, transformation unfolds. Death is not the end, it is the passage. And she, the Red Queen, walks it still. Her funerary mask, delicately pieced together from glistening jade tiles, was far more than ornament. It was a sacred vessel, a map of her soul, meant to carry her likeness into eternity. In Maya belief, the face wasn't just skin and bone. It was the reflection of the spirit. And the spirit, in its journey beyond death, had to be seen, remembered, and recognized by the gods. Around her, ceramic vessels stood like silent guardians, containers that may once have held chocolate, maize, water, or pulque. These were not luxuries. They were sustenance for a sacred voyage, offerings to nourish her as she crossed from life into legend. Nearby, ritual items, stingray spines, shell trumpets, may have been instruments of divine dialogue, tokens to pierce the veil or call to ancestral realms. To the Maya, burial was never a farewell. It was a transformation. Death was not an ending, it was planting. Burial was the seed, and the afterlife was rebirth. Maya kings and queens were not just rulers, they were earthly echoes of celestial gods. And when they died, they didn't simply pass on, they returned. The Red Queen, her body drenched in the sacred red of cinnabar, the color of life, of blood, of sacrifice, was not being mourned. She was being prepared. Enshrined in stone, fed with offerings, and sealed in a pyramid, she was not entering death, she was ascending. and just steps away from her final resting place lies the tomb of Kinich Janab Pakal, Pakal the Great, in the towering temple of the inscriptions. His burial is renowned, a masterpiece of grandeur, cosmic alignment, and spiritual weight. But what makes the Red Queen's tomb extraordinary isn't just what it held, it's where it was. Hidden within Temple 3, directly beside Pakal's monument, her resting place was no accident. In a city like Palenque, where architecture itself was a form of cosmic language, proximity had meaning, and this closeness, it spoke of connection. Many scholars now believe the Red Queen was Tsakbu Aja, Pakal's queen, his consort, his counterpart in both rule and ritual. Her tomb bears no name, but her story is etched in symmetry, both wrapped in cinnabar, both placed in pyramids, both honored with jade, and both laid to rest with reverence befitting divinity. Her death did not silence her. It enshrined her, and her legend, like her mask, endures, whole, sacred, and still watching. These tombs do not just hold bodies, they hold a dialogue. Two chambers, two figures, two halves of a sacred story. Pakal the Great, etched forever into stone, descending through the underworld tree in a vision of cosmic death and resurrection. A king becoming divine, a sun sinking only to rise again, and then the Red Queen. Her tomb bears no grand lid, no mythic engraving, but her silence speaks in symbols, in crimson dust, in jade offerings laid with reverence. In her presence beside him, not behind but beside. If Pakal was the sun, she was the moon. If he descended through darkness to bring dawn, she moved with quiet power, waxing and waning on her own celestial rhythm. Together, they formed a cosmic balance, masculine and feminine, king and queen, fire and shadow, breath and stillness. In Maya cosmology, rulership was never solitary. It was sacred balance. The divine order demanded harmony, not just in the sky, but in the court. By entombing the Red Queen near Pakal, the Maya weren't just honoring a consort, they were preserving a sacred duality, a cosmic partnership that sustained the very rhythm of life. Their tombs reflect this truth, a shared legacy carved not in words, but in presence. Two souls, sealed in cinnabar and stone, bound not by ceremony, but by meaning. A silence more powerful than any inscription. We may never know her true name. No glyph tells us, no monument sings her story. And yet, her burial tells us everything we need to know. The wealth, the care, the symbolism, all point to a woman of immense status, agency, and reverence. She was more than a wife, more than a queen. She was someone who mattered. In her stillness, she unsettles assumptions. She forces us to look again, not just at her, but at every forgotten woman whose voice was buried beneath history's rubble. The Red Queen is not just a relic of the past, she is a revelation. A reminder that in ancient Maya civilization, women were not mere shadows of kings, they were rulers, seers, architects of the sacred. Her legacy is not just in jade or stone, but in the questions she raises, in the scholars who lean closer, in the artists she inspires, in the stories she demands we tell. Because even in silence, she speaks. And perhaps the most extraordinary part of her story isn't what we know, but what we still don't. The Red Queen reminds us that history is more than timelines and relics. It's a living mystery, a collective ache to touch something ancient, to feel the breath of someone long gone. In that sense, her legacy isn't over. It lingers. It waits. She lies wrapped in crimson, the color of blood and birth, of endings and awakenings. Her face, once hidden behind a jade mask, now emerges in fragments, through science, through art, through wonder. She is nameless, yet not silent, enigmatic, yet not erased. She may have ruled a kingdom in her time, but in death she reigns over something more powerful, our imagination. Her tomb was sealed with stone. Her life was etched in silence, and still, she speaks. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in the vivid heart of Coyoacan, once a quiet village on the edge of Mexico City. Her childhood home, La Casa Azul, the Blue House, was a place of contrasts, color and shadow, joy and pain, tradition and rebellion. That house would become many things, a refuge, a battleground, a sacred space that would one day echo with her legacy. She was the third of 4 daughters. Her father, Guillermo Kahlo, was a German-Hungarian photographer, quiet, thoughtful, methodical. Her mother, Matilde Calderón, devoutly Catholic with indigenous and Spanish roots, stern, stoic, emotionally distant. From this paradox, Frida drew both fire and depth. Her father gave her a careful eye, her mother a tenacity forged in silence. Even as a child, Frida was impossible to ignore. curious, defiant, and bursting with questions too bold for the grown world. At 6, polio struck her. Her right leg withered, leaving it thinner and weaker. She hid it beneath long skirts, but never let it diminish her. The illness confined her for months, like cutting her off from other children. But in that isolation, she grew closer to her father, who encouraged her to move, to think, to sharpen her spirit. While other girls learned to sew or serve tea, Frida imagined becoming a doctor, a healer. At 15, she enrolled in Mexico's National Preparatory School, one of the few girls allowed. There, she was electric, not just bright, but dangerous. She didn't just speak her mind. She challenged others to do the same. Frida joined the Cachuchas, a group of radical young thinkers who dissected politics, philosophy, and poetry with reckless passion. She was drawn not just to ideas, but to revolution, the kind that starts in the mind and bleeds into art, identity, and life itself. Even before tragedy carved itself into her spine, Frida Kahlo was already painting her presence into the world, not with soft strokes, but with sharp defiance. Long before her name became legend and before the bus crash that would change everything, she was already refusing to shrink to fit the world's expectations. Frida Kahlo was not simply growing up in Coyoacán, she was preparing to become someone entirely new. Then came September 17th, 1925, the day her life split into two, the girl she had been and the woman forged in the wreckage. She was just 18. School had ended. She boarded a wooden bus with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias. They were young, loud, full of teasing and sparks. With Frida, nothing was ever halfway. Every word, every laugh, every moment was alive with intensity. And then, in a blink, the world collapsed. A streetcar barreled into the bus, crushing it against a wall. The wooden frame shattered like matchsticks. Bodies flew. Chaos roared. Silence followed. Frida's body was broken in every sense of the word. An iron handrail tore through her, entering her left hip, exiting through her pelvis. Her spine cracked in 3 places. Her right leg was destroyed, her foot torn apart, ribs, collarbone, shoulder, all fractured. Her abdomen was pierced, her insides in shock. She lay there, unmoving, bloodied, unrecognizable. A stranger covered her with a coat. Another noticed something strange. Her body glittered. Not from blood or glass, but gold. A pouch of powdered pigment she had carried had burst open on impact, dusting her ruined body in shimmering gold, like a cruel blessing, like a broken statue covered in stardust. They rushed her to the Red Cross hospital. Surgery followed surgery. Weeks in a body cast flat on her back, trapped in pain, infection, and uncertainty. The dream of becoming a doctor slipped further away with each silent hour, but from that stillness, something was born. Her father placed brushes in her hands. Her mother built an easel suspended over her bed. A mirror was fixed above her. And there, encased in plaster, writhing in pain, Frida Kahlo began to paint. At first, it was boredom. Then, something deeper took hold. Her own reflection became her first subject. Not out of vanity, but necessity. She had no other muse. No other model, no other witness to her pain but herself. And so, in the quiet shadow of disaster, she began to remake herself. Not as a broken girl, but as a fierce and unflinching force of art. But what emerged wasn't vanity. It was survival. The crash had shattered her body, left it twisted in plaster and steel, but it also cracked something open inside her. A door, a portal into the labyrinth of her own mind, her own pain, her own truth. And once that door opened, Frida Kahlo didn't just walk through it, she painted her way in. The girl who once dreamed of healing others now found herself on the other side of the equation. The patient, the broken, the silent scream. And so, brush in hand, she began to stitch herself back together, one image at a time. What began as therapy soon transformed into something more powerful, a language, one made not of words, but of blood and pigment, bone and symbolism. And that language was unflinching. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't polite, it was honest. Frida didn't paint flowers for decoration or landscapes for comfort. She painted pain, her raw, specific, unapologetically hers. Her first muse was herself, not out of ego, but necessity. "I paint myself," she once said, "because I am so often alone, and because I am the subject I know best." Her early works were small, intimate, painted on metal or wood, like the Mexican retablos she grew up with, sacred paintings that told stories of agony and grace. Frida took that tradition and turned it inward. Her body became the sacred object. Her pain became the myth. She painted herself as broken, bleeding, pierced, yet never powerless. In one piece, she is nailed like a saint to the backdrop of her suffering. In another, she floats alone in a barren desert, held upright only by a crumbling spinal column, a monument to the damage she carried every day. She painted herself split open, weeping, exposed, but always watching. Her eyes never looked away, and in doing so, she dared the world not to look away either. Frida's work didn't clean up pain to make it palatable. She rendered trauma with defiance, with brutal beauty, and sometimes with unexpected humor. Each painting was a battle cry, a reclamation, a declaration of existence on her own terms. Her body, though broken, became holy ground, her emotions an altar, her truth a revolution. And she wasn't just telling her story, she was rewriting the visual language of suffering. Mexican folk art, surrealism, medical diagrams, religious iconography all collided on her canvas. Her paintings weren't just portraits, they were dreamlike autopsies of the soul, stitched with color, laced with culture, soaked in myth. By the time she stood again, frail, in pain but upright, Frida was no longer the girl who wanted to be a doctor. She was something else now, an artist, a force. And what she created wasn't just art, it was the anatomy of endurance and the birth of an icon. She took the most devastating moment of her life and didn't just survive it, she transmuted it into something radiant. Frida Kahlo didn't merely paint her pain, she demanded the world look at it. And in doing so, she turned suffering into a form of sacred defiance, a rebellion made visible. By 1928, she was still healing, body in fragments, spirit in pieces, but she was painting. And at just 21 years old, she crossed paths with the man who would become both her greatest love and deepest wound, Diego Rivera. He was twice her age, already towering in fame and physique, a titan of Mexican muralism. His frescoes were bold, revolutionary, saturated with politics and people. Frida had admired his work from afar, but now she brought her own paintings directly to him, interrupting him mid-mural, standing below his scaffolding and asking with a fierce, unblinking courage, "Do I have talent?" Diego glanced at her work, just once. "Yes," he said, "and not just out of kindness." In her, he saw something raw and unfiltered, a voice full of agony and irony, beauty and rage. From that moment, something ignited. Their love would burn brightly, but never cleanly. Frida once said, "I suffered 2 accidents in my life, one in which a streetcar knocked me down. The other was Diego." They married in 1929. It baffled outsiders. He was monumental, politically infamous, and unfaithful. She was sharp, radiant with independence, already walking with a cane from the wreckage life had handed her. Her parents called it a marriage between an elephant and a dove. It was a union of intensity, not harmony. Diego believed in her as an artist. He championed her vision, but he broke her heart repeatedly. Even slept with her own sister, Christina. Frida shattered, then stitched herself back together again and again. She took lovers too, men and women, Leon Trotsky, Georgia O'Keeffe. She lived out loud in defiance of betrayal in pursuit of truth. In 1939, they divorced. A year later, they married again, on Frida's terms. This time, she kept her name, her home, her money, her sovereignty. The second marriage was less about possession, more about presence, less about romance, more about recognition. Because through it all, Diego remained, a source of chaos, yes, but also of belief. He wounded her, but he never underestimated her. He saw her not as a muse, but as a force. They were never peaceful, but they were unforgettable. And so, in the 1930s, Frida followed him north, to San Francisco, to Detroit, to New York. She traveled not just as a wife, but as an artist, sharpening her voice, learning how to speak through color, bone, and fire. Her time in the United States was more than a chapter. It was a confrontation. Frida Kahlo found herself immersed in a world of steel skylines, endless consumption, and glittering excess. And it unsettled her to the core. A proud Mexican nationalist, a devoted communist, and a fierce admirer of indigenous traditions, Frida couldn't ignore the jarring contrast between American wealth and the suffering she saw beneath it. While the Great Depression hollowed out communities, she watched the elite cling to extravagance with manicured smiles. In letters home, she mocked their polished lives, their obsession with appearances, their need to mask discomfort with grandeur. She longed for the raw, chaotic poetry of Mexico, the mess, the soul. While Diego covered walls with grand political murals, Frida turned inward, toward the quiet, unflinching revolutions of the self. She painted on tin, on canvas, on pain. Her work grew sharper, more surreal, more intimate. And in that exile, her style was born. Not to please, not to sell, but to survive. Frida's body was a battlefield. The streetcar accident had left her fractured, her spine unstable, her days stitched together by surgeries and suffering. In Detroit, she endured a devastating miscarriage, and so she turned to the only thing she could control, her image. Her self-portraits were not acts of vanity, they were acts of defiance. Each one said, "I am still here." In Henry Ford Hospital, she lies on a blood-stained bed, surrounded by loss, floating symbols of grief and trauma, a fetus, a snail, surgical tools, a cracked pelvis. She cries openly, but her face? Calm, direct, unapologetic. She didn't look away, and she dared us not to either. When she returned to Mexico, she didn't retreat. She doubled down. She and Diego welcomed exiled revolutionary Leon Trotsky into their home, their politics not just spoken but lived. Frida wore Tijuana dresses. More than tradition, they were resistance stitched into cloth. Her wardrobe became her flag, her body, her battlefield, her art, her manifesto. While Rivera painted the movements of the people, Frida painted the price they paid. She captured revolution not in masses, but in the single suffering body, not in glory, but in grit, in exile, in illness, in unbearable solitude. Frida became not just a painter of pain, but a painter of resistance, of identity forged in agony, of a soul too wild to be conquered. When Frida Kahlo returned to Mexico in the late 1930s, she was no longer simply Diego Rivera's wife. She had transformed into something much greater, a force of nature, an artist whose canvases pulsed with vulnerability, defiance, and unflinching truth. Back in her homeland, she stepped fully into her own skin. La Casa Azul in Coyoacan became not just her home, but a sanctuary of paradox, brimming with contradiction, color, and soul. Yellow-framed windows. Aztec statues nestled among lush plants. Parrots and monkeys roamed the garden freely. It wasn't just a house, it was a mirror of Frida's inner world, a blend of indigenous pride and personal rebellion, of beauty and brutality, where the sacred and the sensual coexisted with the scent of copal and the sound of street mariachi. Here, surrounded by ex-votos, folk saints, pre-Columbian artifacts, and revolutionary texts, Frida embraced who she was. Artist, woman, Mexican, survivor. She dressed in bold Tijuana garments, adorned her hair with flowers, and painted not to escape reality, but to grip it tightly and hold it to the light. This was a time of creative fire. Her work deepened, becoming more symbolic, more intricate, more political. The two Fridas, two selves sitting side by side, one clothed in colonial lace, her heart torn and bleeding, the other draped in indigenous strength, heart whole and steady. It was more than a painting. It was a confession, a declaration, a map of survival. In 1939, she exhibited in Paris, where giants like Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky recognized the raw brilliance in her art. And yet, even among surrealists, Frida remained distinct. When André Breton tried to place her among them, she resisted. "They thought I was a surrealist," she said, "but I wasn't. I never painted dreams, I painted my own reality." And her reality was Mexico, not the exotic fantasy sold abroad, but the complicated, wounded, beautiful land she fiercely loved. Her paintings throbbed with symbolism, skeletons, hummingbirds, veins, corn, pain, and blood. She honored the roots of her people while exposing the violence woven through its history. And all the while, her body failed her. Infections, surgeries, relentless pain. She painted from bed, encased in plaster, corseted and braced, her hands gripping brushes like weapons against despair. Frida did not return to Mexico to rest. She came to reclaim, to resurrect her voice, her body, and her fire. Through color, through resistance. Through an unflinching gaze into her own soul. By the 1940s, her spine had begun to crumble. Her right leg was ravaged by infection. She endured more than 30 surgeries, many brutal, many in vain. For months at a time, she lay immobilized, her body stretched by steel, her spirit held together by art. Frida Kahlo wasn't painting to survive. She was surviving to paint. And in doing so, she left behind more than art. She left behind a truth, red, raw, and alive. But still, she painted. Each canvas became a battleground, between agony and expression, between the slow collapse of her body and the defiant clarity of her spirit. These weren't just works of art. They were release, they were rebellion. Her paintings grew darker, sharper, more fearless. She no longer cloaked her truth in metaphor. She wielded it like a blade. In the broken column, she lays herself bare, split open down the center, her spine replaced with a shattered ionic pillar, her body pierced with nails. And yet, her face is calm, her gaze unwavering. Pain for Frida was not a visitor. It was a permanent resident, an antagonist, yes, but also a muse. And as her body weakened, her voice grew louder. She joined the Mexican Communist Party. She marched, she spoke, she wrote with fire, condemning imperialism, injustice, and silence. When walking became impossible, she rolled into protests in her wheelchair, fists raised, banners in hand. She refused to be erased. In 1953, Mexico finally gave her what the world had already begun to recognize, a solo exhibition celebrating her work. Doctors warned her not to go. Her body was too fragile, her condition too severe. So she arrived by ambulance, carried in on a stretcher, placed in the center of the gallery on her hospital bed, like an empress among her creations. Draped in traditional dress, hair crowned with flowers, surrounded by paintings that pulsed with pain and pride, she greeted guests with tequila, laughter, and a fire that refused to die. Her final works carried both innocence and intensity. In Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick, she painted herself bound in a steel corset supported by the hands of Marx, casting off the symbols of oppression. Her last known painting was a still life of sliced watermelons, ripe red, full of life. One piece bore her final words, "Viva la vida." Long live life. Even on the threshold of death, she chose joy. She chose color. She chose resistance. Frida Kahlo's last portraits weren't merely images. They were declarations, acts of revolution, created in agony, signed with life. On July 13, 1954, at the age of 47, Frida Kahlo died in the same place she had first opened her eyes, La Casa Azul in Coyoacán. The cause of death was listed as a pulmonary embolism. But those who knew her best whispered something deeper, something quieter, something you could almost hear in the hush after a final brushstroke. She had been ill, yes, but more than that, she was exhausted. Exhausted from the pain, from the endless surgeries, from the relentless war waged within her own body. And yet, just days before her death, she showed up to a protest against the CIA-backed coup in Guatemala. Weak, wheelchair-bound, but unshakable, she raised her fist, defiant as ever. Revolution was still pulsing through her. Even as her body faded, it remained her final heartbeat. Her last diary entry was short, but searing. "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." When she died on July 13, 1954, Frida Kahlo's body was brought to the Palacio de Bellas Artes, Mexico's grandest stage for culture and art. She lay draped in the red flag of the Communist Party, watched over by friends, family, artists, and revolutionaries. Diego Rivera was inconsolable. He called her the greatest love of his life, though his betrayals had left her shattered more than once. But love, like Frida, was never simple. It burned, it broke, and somehow it endured. And then something remarkable happened. Frida refused to fade. At first, her name was kept alive in quiet corners, whispered in galleries, passed between artists, held in the hands of those who recognized what she had dared to express. Her art didn't fit into tidy boxes, too political for the surrealists, too surreal for the traditionalists, too raw, too real. But as the 1970s and 1980s arrived, her voice was lifted by new movements, by feminist scholars, by queer activists, by a generation searching for truth in unvarnished stories. And suddenly, Frida was everywhere. Not just a painter, a symbol, a woman who turned pain into poetry, who made art from agony, who lived her truth in defiance of expectation and in celebration of who she was: Mexican, queer, disabled, revolutionary, authentic. Her face, that unibrow, that steady gaze, the crown of flowers in her hair, became iconic. Her home, La Casa Azul, became a museum. Her diary, a sacred manifesto. Her paintings now guarded in the world's most revered museums. She had spent much of her life eclipsed by Diego, known more as his wife than as the force of nature she truly was. But in death, she emerged. Frida stepped out of the shadows and stood defiantly, gloriously, in her own light. She didn't just leave behind paintings, she left behind a mirror and dared us all to look, not with pity, not with fear, but with fire. Today, Frida Kahlo's face is everywhere, printed on t-shirts, painted across walls, transformed into dolls, memes, posters, icons. The unibrow, the flowers, that unflinching gaze, instantly recognizable. But her legacy isn't just about image, it's about truth. Frida never asked to be flawless. She never tried to be. She broke the mold and then painted with the pieces. In a world obsessed with perfection, she gave us something much more human. Rawness, mess, color, rage, radiance, joy, all tangled, all real. She didn't hide what made her different. She celebrated it, her disability, her queerness, her politics, her culture, and turned it into art that traveled through time and across borders. She became more than an artist. She became a symbol of defiance, of unapologetic womanhood, of creative resistance. For queer communities, she is a beacon, a bisexual icon who dared to live and love aloud. For women, she's a fierce reminder that power doesn't wait for permission. For disabled artists, she's proof that pain doesn't silence you. It fuels the masterpiece. And for Mexico, she's not just folklore. She is blood. She is legacy. She is home. Her paintings, once dismissed as strange or self-indulgent, are now sacred. The two Fridas. Self-portrait with thorn necklace and hummingbird. The broken column. They're not just admired, they're felt by anyone who has ever hurt and needed to make something holy out of the hurt. She lived in the margins and made them luminous. She lived contradictions and never apologized. A communist who wore gold, a betrayed woman who loved again, a body broken with a soul that refused to shatter. And always she painted, not just with pigment, but with presence, with purpose. Frida Kahlo never set out to be a myth. She just told the truth about herself and, in doing so, about all of us. Now, when we see her face, we see more than history. We see courage, we see color, we see resistance, we see Frida, not gone, but eternal. And now we come to the end of our journey with Frida Kahlo. From pain to art, from silence to voice, from fragments to a lasting symbol, Frida's story isn't just about an artist. It's a powerful reminder to all of us about the strength of living authentically, daring to be different, and creating without apology. Did this story resonate with you? What did Frida leave behind in you? Inspiration, reflection, or maybe a spark to live more boldly? Let us know in the comments below. Your voice might be the light someone else needs. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.